too old to matter. Those were the exact words that came out of my son's mouth. Words I never thought I'd hear from the very child I raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for. I can still remember the look on his face when he said it. Cold, dismissive, as if my entire life had suddenly expired the moment I grew old. He didn't see the hands that once fed him when he was hungry. He didn't remember the nights I stayed awake, rocking him to sleep while the world outside carried on. No, what he saw standing before him was a burden, someone he thought had no value left to give. The pain of that moment cut deeper than any wound. Not because of the insult itself, but because it came from my own flesh and blood. My son, the boy I carried in my arms, the man I believed would always stand by me, looked me in the eye and said I didn't matter anymore. But here's the truth he didn't know. Silence is powerful. And sometimes when people count you out, life is preparing you for a chapter they never saw coming. Because not long after those cruel words were spoken, my name lit up every headline in the country, and my son was forced to face a truth he could never erase. I remember that day more clearly than most of the so-called happy days that people love to talk about. It wasn't Christmas morning, it wasn't a birthday, and it certainly wasn't a celebration. It was just an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day you never expect will leave a scar on your soul. I had gone over to my son's house. He didn't live far from me, 15 minutes by car, if that, but the distance between us felt like miles, and not just in geography. I could already feel the chill when I stepped through his door. His wife, polite but always distant, barely looked up from her phone as she muttered a greeting. My son didn't even glance in my direction. He sat on the couch, scrolling on his tablet, acting as if I were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. That's the thing about growing older. People stop looking at you. They look past you, through you, around you, but rarely at you. And when it's your own child, the very person who once clung to your hand like you were the center of their universe, that indifference cuts deeper than any blade. I sat down quietly, holding on to the little container of cookies I had baked. They were his favorite when he was a boy. Chocolate chip with just a pinch of cinnamon, the way he used to beg me to make them. I thought maybe he'd smile, maybe he'd remember, but when I placed them on the table, he didn't even look up. His wife rolled her eyes and whispered something under her breath. I heard it. Why does she keep bringing stuff like this? It was meant for him, but it sliced through me like glass. And then it happened. My son, my only child, turned to me with a sigh, as if my very presence was some kind of inconvenience. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't shout. No, it was worse than that. He said it casually, almost carelessly, like it was nothing. Mom, you're too old to matter anymore. For a moment, the room spun. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My ears rang, my heart thudded against my ribs. Too old to matter. Those words echoed in my mind, bouncing around like stones in a hollow chamber. I wanted to believe I had misheard him, that maybe I was imagining it. But the look on his face told me otherwise. He meant it. He truly believed it. Do you know what it feels like to have your entire life reduced to a sentence? To be told that the decades of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the endless hours of work, the love, the care, the sweat, the tears, none of it mattered. That's what those words did. They erased me. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I didn't demand respect. I just sat there staring at him, with tears burning behind my eyes that I refused to let fall. Because in that moment, I realized something. My son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an inconvenience, a reminder of age, of responsibility, of something he didn't want to deal with. It wasn't the first time he had been dismissive. The truth is, this moment had been building for years. I had noticed how he stopped calling me unless he needed something, how his wife seemed embarrassed to be around me, always making excuses for why I shouldn't come over too often. Holidays became shorter, phone calls became rarer, And I became smaller and smaller in their lives until I was practically invisible. When he was a child, I worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. His father passed away when he was still young, and I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders to make sure he had everything he needed. I sewed his clothes when I couldn't afford new ones. I stayed up late tutoring him in math, even when I barely understood it myself. I walked miles to work when the car broke down, just so I could save enough for his school trips. Every dream he had, I tried to make possible. And yet here I was, decades later, being told I was too old to matter. The betrayal wasn't just in the words, it was in the tone, the ease with which he dismissed me. It was as though I had already been erased in his mind, like the only role I ever had was to serve him until he no longer needed me. And once he didn't, well, I was just an extra body in the room. I looked at him then, not at the man sitting in front of me, but at the little boy he once was. The boy who cried when he scraped his knee. The boy who begged me to stay by his bed at night until he fell asleep. The boy who once said, "Mom, you're my hero." Where had that boy gone? How had he grown into a man who could look at his mother and strip her of her worth in a single sentence? And still, I stayed quiet. Dignity has a way of silencing you when your heart is breaking. I could have shouted, reminded him of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of love that built the foundation of his life. But what would that do? Words cannot build respect where there is none. So I sat there, hands folded in my lap, my heart heavy but my face calm. I did not let him see me break. Because even if he believed I didn't matter, I knew the truth deep inside me. I mattered. I always had. I always would. And one day, life itself would remind him of that fact in ways far greater than I ever could. When I left his house that day, the cookies still sat untouched on the table. I didn't take them back. I left them there, a silent reminder of the love he was choosing to throw away. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mixture of pain and strength. Yes, I was heartbroken. Yes, I felt betrayed. But there was also a flicker of something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. Because sometimes when the people you love the most push you aside, the universe has a way of pulling you forward into something greater. My son may have told me I was too old to matter, but he had no idea what was about to come next. He had no idea that the mother he dismissed would soon be the woman the whole country would know. And though I didn't know it then, that single cruel sentence was the spark that ignited everything that followed. When I walked out of my son's house that day, the words "too old to matter" followed me like a shadow. They clung to me through the car ride home, through the quiet of my living room, even into the stillness of the night. And yet, instead of lashing out or calling him to demand an apology, I did something else entirely. I stayed silent. Not because I had nothing to say. I had 1,000 words burning inside me. Memories of sacrifices, stories of the life I gave up so he could have his, moments he had clearly forgotten. But sometimes, silence speaks louder than anger ever could. Sometimes silence is the only shield you have left when the people you love have chosen not to hear you. I poured myself a cup of tea that night and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. I thought about aging. What does it mean, really? Society tells us that youth is everything, that beauty, energy, and ambition all belong to the young. But what they never say out loud is how quickly they're willing to discard the old, as if experience, wisdom, and survival mean nothing at all. I thought about my hands. These hands had worked since I was 16. They had washed dishes until the skin cracked, folded laundry in the dead of night, held a crying baby against my chest, signed papers for mortgages I could barely afford, and wiped away tears. His tears. Countless times. And now these same hands were supposed to be worthless? Too old to matter? No. I couldn't believe that. I realized then that respect cannot be begged for. You can't force someone to see your worth if they are determined to be blind. My son didn't see me anymore, but that didn't mean I didn't exist. I still had breath in my lungs, fire in my heart, and dreams. Yes, dreams. Who decided that dreams have an expiration date? So I made a decision that night. I would not waste another drop of my energy trying to prove myself to someone who had already judged me unworthy. Instead, I would pour that energy into myself, into something meaningful, something mine. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. In fact, the beauty of it all was in the secrecy. For years, my identity had been wrapped up in being a mother, a provider, a caretaker. My life had been visible, always centered around someone else's needs. But this was for me. This was my own quiet rebellion. I started small, a notebook, a pen, a corner of the dining table. Late at night, when the house was still and the world had gone to sleep, I would sit there and write. Memories, thoughts, reflections. Some days it was just a single line. I am still here. Other days, the words poured out of me like a flood. Stories I had never spoken. Truths I had never shared. Each word I wrote was like a thread weaving me back together. My silence, once heavy with pain, began to transform into something else. Strength. I no longer needed to shout to be heard. I was building something that would one day speak for itself. In those quiet hours, I began to see aging differently. Aging was not a curse, not a weakness. Aging was a testament to survival. Every wrinkle on my face was a roadmap of battles I had endured and overcome. Every gray hair was a mark of wisdom, a story earned, not given. The world could dismiss me, my son could dismiss me, but they could never erase the proof etched into my very being. And the more I embraced that truth, the more resilient I became. I stopped waiting for phone calls that never came. I stopped checking my messages to see if he remembered me. Instead, I woke up each morning asking myself, what can I do today that matters to me? That question became my compass. Some days I gardened. I planted tomatoes and basil, digging my hands into the earth, reminding myself that growth can come even from the smallest seed. Other days, I read books I had put off for years, letting other people's words spark new ideas in me. And always, I kept writing, page after page, night after night. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. It was about reclaiming the part of me I had lost. The woman I used to be before motherhood consumed every breath, before sacrifice became my second skin. I wanted to remember her. I wanted to meet her again. Silence gave me that. It gave me space to breathe. It gave me space to dream again. And the more I leaned into it, the more I realized that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes strength is a whisper in the dark, a quiet decision to keep going when the world tells you to stop. But there was another side to my silence, something deeper. By not telling my son what I was doing, I was protecting myself. I knew if I told him, he would laugh, dismiss me, maybe even try to stop me. And I couldn't let that happen. So I kept it hidden, like a flame cupped in my hands. Fragile at first, but growing stronger every day. Months passed this way. On the surface, nothing changed. To my son and his wife, I was still the aging woman they barely acknowledged, the one who occasionally visited with cookies they never ate. They had no idea what I was building in the shadows of my silence. They had no idea that every night while they slept comfortably, I was creating something that would one day shatter their perception of me entirely, and yet I carried no bitterness in those moments. Pain, yes. Betrayal, yes. But bitterness? No. Because I knew something they didn't. That my worth was not tied to their recognition. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their applause. All I needed was the quiet certainty within myself that I still had something to give. And oh, I did. The silence that once felt suffocating had become my greatest strength. It allowed me to listen. To my own heart, to my own spirit, to the parts of myself I had silenced for too long. It allowed me to remember that dignity is not given by others. It is chosen, carried, and lived. So I chose dignity. I chose strength. I chose to move forward, quietly but deliberately, carving out a path that was mine alone. What my son didn't understand was that silence isn't weakness. Silence is preparation. And though he thought I was too old to matter, he had no idea what his words had awoken in me. Because while he dismissed me, I was quietly building something that would one day make the world remember my name. What my son never realized, what no one in my family ever suspected, was that my silence was not empty. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Because in the months after he told me I was too old to matter, I began working on something in secret, something that would change everything. Not just for me, but for him too. At first it was nothing more than an idea, a small, fragile spark in the back of my mind. But ideas have power when they are nurtured, and I had time. I had patience, I had pain too, and pain can either break you or become the fire that forges something stronger. I chose the latter. You see, for years I had carried stories inside me, stories of survival, of love, of loss, of perseverance, memories of growing up poor, of losing my husband too soon, of raising my son alone, of working myself to the bone to give him a future. These weren't just moments. They were lessons. Lessons carved into my very being. And though no one ever asked me to share them, I knew deep inside they mattered. So one night, with nothing but a notebook and an old pen, I began to write. Not just scribbles or diary entries like before. This time, I poured myself onto the page. Page after page, night after night, I wrote as though my life depended on it. Because in some ways, it did. Writing became my lifeline, my salvation, the way I rebuilt myself from the pieces my son's words had shattered. But I didn't stop at writing in notebooks. I knew my words deserved more than to sit hidden in drawers. So I taught myself, me, the woman my son thought was too old, I taught myself how to type, how to use programs on the computer, how to upload documents. I stumbled, I made mistakes. I cursed at the screen more times than I can count. But I kept going. I watched tutorial videos late at night, adjusting my glasses as I scribbled notes in the margins of paper. I checked out library books about publishing, about writing, about finding your voice. Every step was a struggle, every click of the keyboard a small victory. And all of it, I did alone. There were moments I wanted to give up. Times when my fingers ached, when the screen froze, when the words refused to come. I would sit there in the quiet of my kitchen, the glow of the lamp casting long shadows, tears rolling down my cheeks as I whispered, maybe he's right. Maybe I don't matter anymore. But then I would hear another voice, my own voice, the voice that reminded me of everything I had endured, of the battles I had fought and won, of the child I had raised against all odds. And I would straighten my back, wipe my tears, and start again. Little by little, something beautiful began to take shape. My stories, once scattered memories, began to form chapters. My pain began to transform into purpose. My silence was no longer heavy. It was productive. It was building something the world had yet to see. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my son, not his wife, not even my closest friend. This was mine. My secret, my project, my quiet rebellion. It gave me strength just to know that every day I was working on something that mattered, even if no one else thought I did. But let me tell you, it wasn't easy. The obstacles came at me from all sides. There was the technology I didn't understand, the self-doubt that whispered in my ear, the exhaustion that came from long nights and early mornings. And then there was the weight of loneliness, doing it all without a hand to guide me, without a voice to encourage me. Still, I pressed on, because once you begin to remember your worth, it's impossible to go back to forgetting. Weeks turned into months, pages turned into chapters, and eventually, chapters turned into a manuscript. Yes, a manuscript. I had written a book. Me, the woman who was too old to matter, had written down her life, her lessons, her truths, and bound them together in words that would outlive me. The day I finished that first draft, I sat back in my chair and cried. Not tears of sorrow this time, but of triumph. Because for the first time in years, I had done something just for me. Something no one could take away. But finishing the book was only the beginning. Now came the hardest part, getting it out into the world. And if you think that was easy for a woman like me, think again. I faced rejection after rejection. Publishers didn't return my calls. Agents brushed me off. Some told me politely that my story wasn't what readers were looking for. Others didn't even bother to reply. Every no felt like another reminder of the words my son had said, that I didn't matter. But here's the thing about resilience. Once you've survived life's worst storms, rejection doesn't destroy you. It fuels you. Every letter that said no only made me work harder, polish my words, sharpen my message. And then, one day, the tide shifted. A small independent publisher took a chance on me. They saw the value in my story, in my voice, in my truth. They believed when no one else did. And in that moment, the project I had built in secret, the project born from silence and pain, began to step into the light. Holding the first printed copy of my book in my hands was unlike anything I had ever felt. The weight of it, the smell of the paper, the sight of my name on the cover, it was proof. Proof that I mattered. Proof that my age was not a limitation. Proof that dignity, resilience, and perseverance could triumph over dismissal and cruelty. And though I held that book in my hands alone, I knew I wasn't truly alone. Every woman who had ever been told she was too old, too weak, too irrelevant, she was there with me in those pages. Every mother whose sacrifices had been forgotten, every soul who had been dismissed by their own family, they were all there. And this book was for them as much as it was for me. It was then I realized something powerful. My son's cruel words hadn't destroyed me. They had awakened me. They had pushed me to create something I never would have otherwise. He thought he was silencing me, but in truth, he gave me the reason to speak louder than ever before. That book, my book, was the secret that changed everything. And soon the world would know it too. The day it happened, I was sitting quietly in my living room, sipping a cup of coffee I had poured almost mindlessly. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, illuminating the notebook where I had once scribbled thoughts and ideas that eventually became my book. I hadn't expected anything dramatic that morning. My days had become ordinary again, filled with small routines, tending to my plants, checking emails, and, of course, the occasional quiet reflection on everything that had led me here. And then, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. My instinct was to ignore it, to assume it was another routine call, another solicitation, another reminder of the ordinary life I had grown used to. But something told me to pick up. And when I did, the voice on the other end changed everything. "Congratulations," the woman said. "Your book has gone viral. You're on every major news outlet, social media is exploding, and your story, well, it's everywhere." For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. My hands trembled, my chest tightened, and I had to sit down. Viral? Headlines? Everywhere. It sounded surreal. I had worked in silence, night after night, without telling a soul, pouring my life into those pages, and now the world was about to see it. I ran to my computer, fingers shaking as I opened the news websites, my name typed in the search bar. And there it was. My name, bold and prominent, front and center. There were articles on news portals I had only ever glanced at from afar, stories on television channels, viral posts on Facebook, Twitter threads, Instagram stories, even interviews posted online. People were talking about me. People were talking about my life, my journey, my resilience. And then, social media exploded. Comments poured in, messages from strangers I would never meet, thanking me, praising me, relating to my story, saying that I had inspired them. Every notification that pinged on my phone felt like a heartbeat of recognition, validation, and connection. People I didn't even know were acknowledging my existence, my worth, and my voice. But the most profound reaction came from the family who had once dismissed me. My son. I could see it in his voice when he called later that afternoon. He was quiet at first, fumbling for words, and I could hear the surprise, the shock, the disbelief. "Mom, I saw the news. Your book. It's everywhere. I didn't realize." His words trailed off. He didn't finish the sentence because there was nothing to finish. He had no explanation, no apology, no justification for the years of indifference. And I realized that in that moment, the shockwaves were hitting him harder than anyone else. He had always believed that I was irrelevant, that my contributions and sacrifices were invisible. He had laughed at my age, dismissed my opinions, and treated me like an afterthought. But now, suddenly, the world was listening. The very world that had ignored him as a child was applauding me as an adult. My life, my choices, my voice, validated on a scale he could neither ignore nor undo. And the ripple effects didn't stop there. My story was shared across television morning shows, discussed in newspaper editorials, and dissected on social media platforms. Bloggers and influencers shared my journey, describing it as a testament to resilience and perseverance, proof that age is never a limitation, and an inspiring story of a mother's quiet strength. My name was trending on multiple platforms. Notifications, alerts, headlines. They were constant reminders that I had been heard, finally, loudly, and by everyone. I remember sitting back in my chair, letting it all sink in. The feeling was overwhelming, exhilarating, and, yes, a little surreal. The quiet life I had lived, the late nights of writing, the endless self-doubt, the solitude, it had all led to this moment. And in that quiet triumph, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and peace. Because here's the thing about recognition. It's not just about fame. It's about the acknowledgement of your existence, the proof that your struggles, your sacrifices, and your journey matter. For the first time in a long time, the world acknowledged that I mattered. I could hear the echoes of disbelief in my son's voice whenever he called or texted. His friends, his colleagues, even casual acquaintances began mentioning my story. They had all seen the headlines, the viral posts, the interviews, and suddenly, he had to face the reality that the woman he once dismissed, the mother he told was too old to matter, had accomplished something remarkable, something that earned not only attention, but admiration. He didn't say it outright, but I knew. I could feel the weight of his regret in every hesitant word, in every awkward pause when he spoke to me. For a moment, I wondered if I should savor it, if I should relish the irony. But that's not who I am. My satisfaction wasn't about revenge. It was about the quiet, undeniable truth that had finally been revealed. In the days that followed, the headlines didn't fade. My book climbed the charts. Invitations for interviews, talk shows, podcasts, and speaking engagements began arriving. Messages poured in from readers, from women and men of all ages, telling me how my story had touched them, inspired them, reminded them that it's never too late to reclaim your voice. My silence had been transformed into influence. My invisibility had been transformed into recognition. And through it all, I could feel my son watching. Not physically, of course, but emotionally. Psychologically. He was learning the hard way that the person he had dismissed, the person he had called irrelevant, was a force he could no longer ignore. I wasn't just a mother in his house anymore. I was a presence in the world, a name that people respected, a story that people remembered. I often thought back to that afternoon when he said I didn't matter. I realized that his words had been a catalyst. He had inadvertently pushed me to prove something. Not to him, but to myself. And now that proof was out there, undeniable, public, and permanent. Every headline, every viral post, every interview, it wasn't about punishment. It was about transformation. And as my name lit up every screen, every news outlet, every social media feed, I felt a sense of quiet triumph that words cannot capture. Because finally, the world saw what I had always known. I mattered. I always had. And for the first time, my son had no choice but to acknowledge it. It didn't happen immediately. My son didn't show up at my door the moment my book went viral, nor did he call me in the first week. He needed time. Time to process, time to swallow his pride, time to reconcile the reality that the woman he once dismissed as too old to matter had suddenly become someone the entire country was paying attention to. I knew it would come eventually. People like him, people who have always measured worth by age or by convenience, eventually realize the truth when it stares them in the face, and when it does, it's rarely quiet or graceful. The first time he called, I could hear it immediately in his voice. Hesitation, uncertainty, shame. The confident, almost arrogant tone he had carried for years was gone, replaced by something quieter, something tentative. "Mom," he began, and I could tell he had rehearsed this sentence 100 times. I saw the news. Your book, your story. I didn't realize." I let him trail off. Let him sit with the weight of what he was about to admit. "I was wrong," he finally said. I treated you like you didn't matter. I didn't see you. I took you for granted, and I'm sorry." There it was. The words I had longed to hear, the acknowledgement that he had finally recognized the truth. And yet the moment was bittersweet. It wasn't just relief. I couldn't allow myself to feel pure joy. That would have meant excusing years of neglect, years of dismissiveness, years of him turning his back on me when all I had done was give everything. But I felt something else. Validation. Proof. Proof that age does not define worth. That experience, resilience, and silent perseverance carry weight. That the sacrifices, the nights I spent awake, the tears I had held back, the dreams I had deferred for him, all of it mattered. And now the world knew it. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't lecture. I just listened. Because the beauty of regret is in its honesty, in its humility, in the moment it finally surfaces. And yes, there was sorrow in his tone, but there was also learning, growth, recognition of his own errors. I can't believe I said those things," he continued, voice cracking. I thought I was right. I don't know. I thought I was helping you. But I see now. I was blind. I was cruel. I'm so sorry, Mom." It was tempting to respond with anger, to remind him of every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every holiday missed because he thought I didn't matter. But I stayed quiet, because in this moment, no lecture was necessary. Actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. I reflected on that. Years of love, sacrifice, and quiet endurance had led to this point. And it wasn't revenge that fueled the satisfaction I felt. It was the undeniable truth that I had persevered, that I had created something that mattered, that I had reclaimed my own worth without needing his validation. And yet now, he had to face the reality. I mattered. I had always mattered. There was a pause on the phone, the kind of silence that carries the weight of reflection. I could almost hear him replaying the past in his mind, seeing the moments he had dismissed me, recognizing the countless ways I had supported him, guided him, and loved him without condition. I don't deserve your forgiveness," he whispered. I don't want to lose you again. I see now that I was wrong. I hope you can forgive me someday." And I realized in that moment that forgiveness wasn't a favor. It was a choice. Not because I wanted to erase his mistakes, but because I understood the power of closure, the strength of perspective, and the importance of holding on to my own dignity. I told him simply, softly, "I forgive you, but know this. My worth was never yours to give or take. It was always mine." He was silent after that. I could hear him breathing slowly, as though letting that truth settle into his bones. He wasn't used to being humbled. He wasn't used to seeing the woman he had dismissed emerge victorious, resilient, and recognized by the world. I thought about the irony. For years, he believed he held the power. He thought he could define my life, my relevance, my importance. And yet, it was my own quiet strength, my perseverance, and my secret work that shaped the reality we now faced. He had believed in control. I had believed in myself. And as I listened to him on the other end of the line, the remorse, the humility, and the acknowledgement in his voice, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. A quiet, firm peace, born not out of vengeance, but out of proof. Proof that age, dismissal, and cruelty cannot define a person's worth. That resilience, courage, and the decision to continue, even when unseen, can change the narrative of a lifetime. I reflected on all those years, the nights of worry, the days of labor, the constant care I had poured into him without recognition. I thought about the times I had been ignored at family gatherings, overlooked at birthdays, dismissed at holidays. And yet none of that had broken me, because I had known, deep inside, that my value was never contingent on their acknowledgement. It was inherent, built through love, sacrifice, and endurance. Hearing his regret, I realized it wasn't just about him seeing me. It was about him finally understanding what it meant to matter, truly, deeply, as a human being whose worth cannot be measured by convenience, age, or appearance. And in that realization, I found closure, not because he apologized, but because I had proven beyond any doubt that my life, my efforts, and my existence were meaningful. Our conversation ended with a quiet understanding. He didn't need to grovel, I didn't need to lecture, and neither of us needed to dwell on the past. What mattered now was the recognition of truth. That the woman he once dismissed had not only survived, but thrived. That my age, my silence, and my perseverance had culminated in undeniable proof of worth. And as I hung up the phone, I felt the weight of history shift in my chest. Not because of what he felt, but because of what I had accomplished. Not because of his regret, but because my life, my efforts, and my resilience could never be erased. I mattered. I had always mattered. And now, for the first time, he had no choice but to see it. That moment, bitter and sweet, taught me the most important lesson of all. Life doesn't need to prove anything to the world. But sometimes the world, and those we love, finally catches up. And in that catching up, justice of a quiet, dignified kind is delivered. Not out of revenge, but out of truth, out of strength, out of the unwavering proof that age, disregard, or doubt cannot diminish the value of a life fully lived. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I want to speak to you directly. Life has a way of testing us, of pushing us into corners where we feel small, invisible, or dismissed. And sometimes it's the people closest to us who make us feel that way. But let me tell you something I've learned through every heartbreak, every moment of doubt, every lonely night spent building my life in silence. Age is never a limitation. It doesn't define your worth, your strength, or your ability to make a difference. The years behind you are not chains. They are proof. Proof that you have lived, learned, survived, and grown. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too old to matter. Don't let anyone diminish your contributions, your dreams, or your voice. Respect isn't something the world hands out freely. It isn't a gift based on convenience, beauty, or youth. Respect is earned through courage, through perseverance, through the quiet, unwavering decision to keep moving forward. No matter how many times life pushes you down. I faced dismissal, betrayal, and disregard. But I refused to let them define me. And when the world finally saw my truth, my worth, and my strength, I realized something remarkable. The only approval you truly need is your own. So, wherever you are, whoever doubts you, remember this: you matter. Your age does not dictate your relevance, your life, your story, your resilience. Those are what define you. Keep going, keep fighting, and above all, keep demanding the respect you've earned, no matter your age. Because respect isn't given, it's earned no matter your age.